Nick asked this question in my Facebook group. What psychological tools could we use to avoid relapse into disordered eating? Well, stay right where you are because psychologist Dr. Connie Stapleton, who specializes in bariatric surgery, is with me today to answer your question.
They're back. ProCare Health's customer favorite calcium dark chocolate bars are now available online at procarenow.com. Creamy chocolate plus calcium and vitamin D. You'll love them. Use code Susan10 to save 10%.
Hi, I'm registered dietitian nutritionist Dr. Susan Mitchell. You're listening to the Bariatric Surgery Success podcast, episode number 70. Most of my career, I've worked in some type of media, particularly radio, where I did morning drive nutrition spots over 18 years. That's what led me to podcasting. I've been podcasting now well over 10 years. Ultimately, it led me to you. I created Bariatric Surgery Success to provide you with that life-changing information, always based on science, simple strategies, tools to help you be successful in your transformation and your journey. So happy you've connected with me. You're in the right place. I'm glad you're listening. Don't forget to sign up for the weekly newsletter if you haven't already. You'll get a weekly tip. You'll hear about freebies, info on the latest podcast episode. Be the first to know about specials and sales, whatever's going on. You can sign up today on my homepage, breakingdownnutrition.com. Join me today via Skype is Atlanta-based psychologist Dr. Connie Stapleton. Well, if you're a regular listener, then you've already heard Dr. Connie on the podcast before talking about your relationship with food or how to handle a bully. That was one of her best podcasts that I know you guys loved. You told me so. She has vast experience in the field of bariatrics, and she shares practical skills for improving your post-op relationship with food and with other people. But you know what? Most importantly, about your relationship with yourself. She teaches you better ways, as I say, to deal with life stuff. You can find links in the show notes to Dr. Connie's website, and it's complete with resources as well as her podcast called Bari Aftercare. Well, welcome back to the podcast, Dr. Connie.
Thank you, Dr. Susan. I always love being here, and I am so grateful for the work that you do.
Well, thanks. You know what? Together, I just think we go hand in hand in what we do, for sure.
I agree.
So how are things in Atlanta? And before I start, what do we need to know about that you're working on right now?
Oh, my greatest things going on right now are the Bari Aftercare program. You mentioned the Bari Aftercare podcast, which I'm really grateful for. But the Bari Aftercare podcast is part of a bigger program called Bari Aftercare.
I did not know that.
It's based on a lot of the psychological tools. Because in addition to following all of the tips and tools that the nutritionists and the dietitians give to the patients, it goes a little into the psychological piece. So marrying the two, like you and I do,
Yes.
while we're on your podcast, is such a great idea. So to get a little deeper into the psychological piece, you can check out the whole Bari Aftercare program, which is bariaftercare.com.
Okay. And does your website link to that as well?
Most definitely does.
Okay.
Thank you so much for asking.
All right. So that way, remember, those will be in the show notes, everyone. Okay. You heard the question at the beginning from Nick, and he wants to know what psychological tools can we use so that you avoid relapse into disordered eating. And just as you said a minute ago, from my many years of practice, I understand and really appreciate the tight interface, if you will, between my work as a dietitian and yours as a psychologist. In fact, as I just mentioned, they go hand in hand. And I have learned over years, you really can't do one without the other. You can have a fabulous diet, but emotions can derail your very best efforts. So I want you to talk just a little bit about psychology and then move into some of the top tools that you suggest to avoid relapse.
Absolutely. And I love this topic. I was so excited to see that Nick had asked this question because in your intro, you talk about these simple strategies, and they are, it's simple to say, drink more water. It's simple to say, make a food plan. It's simple to stay away from this and that, but it's difficult. So while the strategy itself may be simple, it gets difficult because of exactly what you said, Susan, the emotions. And emotions make it like trying to work and see through tremendous fog. So the strategy is simple, except that it's all clouded with this fog of emotion. So psychology comes in and says, all right, take this beautiful strategy that the dietitian has shared with you and helps people work through the fog by looking at the behavior and the thinking. So when we talk about what strategies that you can use that are psychologically based, the number one thing is that thinking. The self-talk is critical to success in this process.
And you know what? I want to jump in here because
Yeah,
I totally agree with this because we can have the best tools and ideas, but there's a breakdown so often that I see between I hear it, okay, here's what I want you to do, and here are the things you can do and be empowered to do, but there's a breakdown before it gets to implementation. And
right.
that's where I'm hearing you say that, emotions come into play and all the other crap, if you will, that's in the way,
Exactly.
is preventing the implementation. And I hear that's what Nick is saying. How do we stop this or keep it
Right.
from happening again? Okay, so self-talk. Yes, I love this because so many people, I mean, I'm guilty of this, aren't you? There are days when I just go,
Absolutely.
oh, geez, where did I leave my brain? Somewhere else, or I need to go outside a minute just so I can dump the garbage out of my brain.
Exactly. And when you say all that other crap, unfortunately, a lot of us bring bucketfuls of crap into our adult lives, right? That leave us thinking, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I have the ability, or it's just too hard, or all that crappy self-talk.
Why
And
are
so
we
we
our own worst enemies?
we are totally our own worst enemies. But part of what has to happen is working on that self-talk and changing it whether you believe it or not, but also looking at, where did this crap come from? Where did I get the idea that I can't do this? Where did I get the idea that I'm not worth it? Where did I get the idea that I'm not as good as other people or worthy as other people? That's a bunch of crap.
Oh,
So,
thank you.
yeah,
Did everyone hear that? Can you say that again?
yes, that is all a bunch of crap.
Yeah.
Every human being has equal value. So we have, but
Yes.
here's the thing, we don't buy into it. We think other people are more worthy than we are. We put tremendous effort into our kids and our partners and our spouses and our friends because they're worth it. But we don't treat ourselves as well. We don't talk to ourselves as well. And that's why the simple strategies become very difficult, because I don't believe in me. That's got to change
Okay. How?
by saying I'm as valuable as every other person. I deserve health as much as everybody else. I can do this a step at a time. I can get help when the going gets tough. I choose health. I choose health. That's a beautiful mantra because it falls over every category of your life: food, exercise, relationships, job. I choose health. I choose a healthy lifestyle, which leads to my second point, which is quit focusing on food and scale and weights and diet. Focus on living fully.
You
Choose
know,
health.
that one right there is so important because when someone's had bariatric surgery in the beginning, there is a lot of teaching that you have to
Right.
do about
Right.
caloric intake due to and portion size
Sure.
and grams of high quality protein that you have to have and limited grams of carbs. So there is a required, if
Sure.
you will, focus on understanding the macros and the calories in the beginning. But
Definitely.
I'm a huge believer that, yes, you got to know that because knowing it is power and knowing it lets you make wise decisions. But then you've got to take the focus off of that and look at food as a whole and the enjoyment of life.
Right.
Not saying, oh, darn, I ate too many carbs, I'm going to pay for it. Because I call it that stinky thinking really will
Yeah.
mess you up.
It does. It's like living with blinders on, if you think about it. If you hold both hands up next to your face and your whole world is about food, it's like living with blinders on and you miss three-fourths of what's going on around you. But I
Yeah.
totally agree. And that's one of the other psychological tools, which is education and awareness. And I agree with you that there's a time frame where you've got to learn what you might not have known.
Exactly. And in nutrition, with bariatric nutrition is so different from every, what I will just say,
Yes.
everyday nutrition. And not that, I mean, we're still eating all the same foods. I'm a big believer in that. It's just that you're
Mhm.
eating different portions with a
Right.
focus more on protein. So they're just strategies that really make the difference in how successful that surgery is going to be. But ultimately, they still fit into the whole picture, as you're saying, of life, of life. It's not,
Right.
that's not all life is.
Right, absolutely. Life is big and full, and we've got to learn to enjoy it. But for so long, for so many people, it's been all about food, and food just it encompasses your life. And so you've got to get the education and the awareness, and then if you're struggling to implement these things, you got to go, what is that about, and dig a little deeper. Emotional eating or relapse into emotional eating or unhealthy eating, you got to understand the relapse cycle and what's involved in that, which is not just behavioral. The behavioral thing is the last piece in the cycle. There's an emotional step that comes way before reaching for the food, which
Right.
is dealing with stress and not being able to identify triggers. And then there's this whole mental relapse, like I give up, why bother? I give in. So
Hmm.
it's that thinking, it's education about not only the dietary things, but this whole business of how emotions fog your decision making, and working on some skills and some questions to ask yourself, because if you make a better decision, you'll have fewer regrets.
So when someone's going to get this education, or so let me back up to tying all this in. We were going on with, I choose health and other
Mhm.
mantras. So
Right.
as part of that awareness of speaking positive to yourself, and understanding and getting the education, do you look at things like daily readings or vision
Mhm.
boards or affirmations, or maybe a text or an email or a voicemail, something that comes that people hear and see and interact with on a daily basis that helps?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because when we're first new to this business of learning how to do this, it needs to be front and center. So I do a thing called Motivate Me, which is it's part of the bariatric care program, where I send out 4 texts a day with just, positive messages and reminders that keep going, keep going, keep going. And I think a daily reading is very, very powerful, or even just a positive word to focus on all day long, because it keeps this whole business of living healthy, choosing health, living fully right front and center. Affirmations are great, vision boards are amazing. I call this a meaningful matter. It's like looking at, why did you want to become healthier in the first place? And that becomes your vision, right? I do what I do because this is what I want. So
Okay,
keeping these things front and center is critical.
so let's say you've been trying that, and then you just have you feel yourself sliding, and
Okay.
you've quit doing your readings, and your words to yourself aren't quite so nice, and you stop the just positive mantras. And as you're saying, education. Okay, so stressful event happens in your life, and many times that's a trigger for drugs. I know what you'll talk about, and I know it's definitely a trigger for emotional overeating. Uh, uh,
Absolutely.
so when you feel yourself struggling and you're not doing these above things, or they kind of slide away, and awareness, you're aware of it, what then? Do you see a psychologist? Are there tools online that are beneficial as well? Do you do both? Because you're saying, okay, understand the relapse cycle. Let's talk about that. And then how do they go from awareness to and that understanding, and then doing something about it?
Well, there's so many roads to Rome, right? So I say do what works for you. The first place you could start is Google understanding emotional eating, stopping emotional eating. Just Google those words, how to stop emotional eating, or understanding the relapse cycle. The relapse cycle for drugs or gambling or shopping or overeating is absolutely the same. And it starts with stress, right?
Right.
We have stress. So people need to become aware of what their stressors are, right? So, oh gosh, I realize that when I'm running late, I reach for food. Or when, my spouse or my partner says something critical to me, I reach for food. Or when my kids are all uptight, I reach for food. So understanding what is going on that you reach for food, but definitely getting some help. This isn't something people can do alone, but you can learn how to identify and work through emotional eating traps by looking online, by getting a therapist, by getting into a support group, by getting into a therapy group. I do an online therapy group for bariatric patients. So we meet in person online and we talk about these things. I know that's difficult for some people. So do what works for you. If it's reaching out individually to you or individually to me, or getting into a program, or reading through bariatric care, or Googling, do what you need to do. But you can't do this alone. We
Ag-
need to learn.
Agreed. That's one of the things I love about I have a private Facebook group, and I'm picky about who comes in and picky about who
Nice,
stays, because I
nice.
only want people in there who are in there to help each other, to share.
Right.
I mean,
Hmm.
don't even try to bully, or I'll bully you right out the door. I mean, I want
Right.
people, I want
Right.
you to be a place where everyone comes and can vent and say, here's what I'm dealing with, here's what I'm dealing with from a food related perspective. And that's where, when we've talked about you coming on, we'll have these different posts like Nick and others who will say, okay, let's ask Dr. Connie this, because that's not my expertise, but I see how tightly they fit together, and we all need a safe place to
Right.
come and share,
Right.
where it's not going to be repeated outside that group.
And
It's
we're not
so
going to feel
important.
shame. We're going to feel understood and not
Yes.
be shamed. You know, yeah. And you and I have been down the road, right? I've had issues. I've had struggles with food. I've gotten a lot of therapy before I ever went back to school to be a therapist. And so I'm not going to judge anybody seeking help. I'm going to be like, wow, you're one of the brave few.
Yeah. I love my brave people in the group, because that's what it's all about. I love my peeps. We're here to stick together and help one
Yeah.
another. Okay, so relapse prevention, you're talking about cognitive therapy, you're talking about getting with the right professionals, with a registered dietitian, with a therapist. What else are the other tools you can practice at home in addition to the ones we mentioned at the beginning?
Right.
I think of like mindfulness, for example. And again, mindfulness, you hear about it all the time, but you have to put it into play. You want to talk a
Right.
little about that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a buzzword. I
Yeah.
really kind of cringe every time I hear the word
Yeah. It's like,
mindfulness.
come on, what is it really? And how do
Right.
I do something with it that's going to make a difference day to day?
Yeah. Do you know what? It really does make a difference, even though the word makes me cringe. But mindfulness is paying attention to what you're doing in the moment, really paying attention. If you're doing the laundry, then smell the laundry, fold the laundry, feel the fabric. If you're eating, sit down with your food. Don't be reading, don't be watching TV. Focus on the food, enjoy the food. You know, it's just paying attention to what you're doing, not trying to multitask in 15 directions and miss everything. That's why we say that's like one of the tools that I'm sure you recommend is don't sit in front of the TV with a bag
No.
of chips. You're going to
Right.
eat the whole dang thing.
Oh yeah, yeah. You won't even know they're there, because
Right.
you're too engrossed in whatever's on television. I'm a big one for family meals. I don't care if family
Mhm.
meals it's just you or you and your dog or cat. It
Right.
is putting a lovely plate down and putting your food on it and sitting down and eating a meal, so that you notice and smell and taste and chew and enjoy every bite that comes in.
Most definitely. It's so much more satisfying than gulping and running, you know, so much more
Absolutely.
satisfying. Yeah. And you can go, okay, that was delightful. Now on to the next thing in life. In life. So mindfulness is paying attention. Self-monitoring is really a great tool, as you know, and I know you encourage people to do that. And self-monitoring doesn't have to be writing down everything you eat or noting it in an app. But self-monitoring is just talking to somebody else about your day, your progress, what you're struggling with. It's just being aware of where you're doing well. Please give yourself credit for where you're doing well. and
Absolutely.
yeah, and get help for the things you need to work on. And the last thing that I would really recommend for people, and honestly, I think this is so understated. We have to help people understand that so much of emotional eating in particular is about coping. coping, we use food to cope. In other words, I don't like how I feel, so I'm going to use food and I think I feel better. Well, I might temporarily, but in the long run, you feel worse because
Yeah.
then you beat yourself up, blah, 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 blah.
Yes,
But
totally.
people need to learn healthy coping skills for dealing with stress.
These are
Look it up.
these are great. I mean, these tools and gives us a lot to think about. So I know as we wrap up, you always have one takeaway you don't want anyone to miss. What would that be
Yes.
today?
Today, it would be give yourself the gift of valuing yourself and treating yourself as well as you do others. It all boils down to valuing yourself so you'll do the things that a person who values themselves does for positive change.
Love it. Thank you. I'm so glad you're here with us and we take on these topics. You give
Yeah.
really great, usable information. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Susan. I so appreciate the work that we do and the people who turn to those of us who are trying to help and ourselves as well as others.
Well, if you have more questions you want Dr. Connie to answer, remember she's here about every 5 or 6 weeks. So feel free to contact me through the website, breakingdownnutrition.com. There's a contact us link at the top of the page. You can messenger me through Facebook. You can reply to one of the newsletters. I read every email that comes in. Remember, as we just said, take care of you. You're worth it.
Bariatric Surgery Success with dietitian Dr. Susan Mitchell is produced and owned by Practicalories LLC, all rights reserved. Remember, the content provided on this podcast is for information purposes only and doesn't create a patient-provider relationship. It's intended to provide reference material and is not designed to provide medical advice. Please consult your healthcare provider regarding any medical issues you have relating to symptoms, conditions, diseases, diagnosis, treatments, and side effects. Podcast guests express their own opinions, experience, and conclusions which do not necessarily reflect or agree with the host, Dr. Susan Mitchell or Practicalories LLC.